Hello, I would like today to show you a fun scenario to use your own code to build an agent running inside the Foundry Hosted Agent platform and to see the value of that, what kind of services and additional services we may provide once you host your agent in our platform. So this scenario is pretty fun. Let's imagine you like to design 3D worlds using an AI. So it could be useful to build, for instance, like fantasy worlds for kids, but it could be for the gaming industries to build assets or levels for game assisted by AI while keeping the control of the flow because I'm using Blender 3D in this case. So I could now then export, some of the work in Blender and continue as a 3D artist. So what I did there is I've been building this hosted agent in Python. It's running in my own custom chat client on the left. I asked to create a fantasy world so you can see the output. But the beauty also of the platform is that I can export my agent on the M365 Copilot, client too. So this is what I did. I asked the very same prompt. Of course, I had a slightly different output. So you see that my agent is exposed in multiple clients already thanks to the Foundry Hosted Agent platform. Now I'm going to show you so that I can continue the conversation because we have isolation in place. It's based on MicroVM, meaning that the session on the left and the session on the right are not sharing anything. They are both using the Blender process, but it's being completely isolated. This is giving out of the box for free for you. So now I could ask, for instance, to add a castle behind the houses. And we are going to let it work and see what it's going to do. So you see it managed to update the scene. And by the way, if I'm not specifying to do a rendering, it's going to share the viewport of Blender. You see that I can suspect there is an issue because it put probably the castle on top of one of the house. But what I can do also, specific to my WebShack client, because I can fully customize also the experience on the client side, I can ask to show me the GLB. So GLB is a file format in 3D. It's GLTF. That's going to export from Blender the current scene, and I will be able then to download it, to load that into a different 3D tool or engine. And this is what I'm going to do. I will have two options, either to download it, which is something I can do also with the M365 client. But in the case of the M365 Copilot client, of course, I am limited to what the experience is proposing, which is, already super cool. But in my case, you see, I can either download the Blender scene or view it using Babylon.js, which is a 3D engine I've been co-creating a long time ago. And you see that now I can immediately open that inside the 3D canvas and review the scene, which means you see I already have a pretty cool process to build my 3D environment for the kids. And let's imagine I would like to, I'm frustrated because I want to move myself the castle. I could ask so I need to ask to download it. Rather than showing the viewport. So he understood, so let me download the Blender scene. Should be more explicit, which means that I need to refine my tool and my prompt. We're going to see how I was able to build that. I've been using the Blender MCP that basically converted that into my agent. So you see now I've got this Blender scene. I can download it, open it, and this is part of the process I wanted to do, is really something to be AI assisted, but while keeping the full control of it. So now I can potentially move, the castle. I need to understand how we built the full scene, but I can probably have something specific for the castle and move it myself. So you see, it's AI assisted, but always human in the loop to keep control of it. Now let's review what the Foundry platform is giving to me. So if I'm now going inside the portal itself, so this is my agents running. I can have the playground, of course, which means I can also try the agent there, but I can see traces, which is super convenient because let's see, for instance, this one. I guess this is the last one that I ask. You can see the waterfall of what happened. So in this case, what it did is as invoked the agent. I can see what was the exact ask. So it was to download the Blender scene. I can see, for instance, that he asked to call a specific tool, and this tool, what it's doing is going to save that into my Azure blob storage. and provide back an URL to let me download it. Of course, I can see previous traces. For instance, I guess this one was probably the one to ask, no, it was the previous one. So this one is to get the castle. No, it was a GLB. This one should be the castle. Okay, so this one was a castle. So for instance, if I like to debug what's going on, if I had an issue on a specific ask, you can really try to replay the trace, which is really, really helpful for debugging. But something else you have for debugging, if you go in the session this time, you see that I've got an active session, which is my custom web shell client. I can see the log there, which means that my agent is going to trace everything going on. I can, of course, define what I would like to trace. It's an app, it's a regular app, and this has been super useful for me to debug any issue I had in production. I'm going to show you that most of the time, as I'm using Docker on my machine, I've got almost identical, environment in production, except that you have different rights that you need to manage. Because the identity of the agent could be different than your own identity on your machine. But what's really convenient is to have access to the storage, for instance. And if I'm going there, I can see, the file that I've been saving directly there. So you see that this is the agent, not the M365 one, but the agent from my custom web chat client. And I can verify the screenshot, and of course I can do more stuff like going to the logs and check the logs. So this is really out of the box ready for you to help you to build your complete experience. On top of that, then you can monitor your agent. So once again, by default, when you use, in my case, the Microsoft Agent Framework, I will have that for free, meaning that by default, telemetry will be auto-enabled and put there. So I can monitor, by that the number of tool calls, number of agent runs, and what's really interesting, if I'm going back to the traces, something that was interesting for me, let's imagine I would like to evaluate what was the cost of the first call to build the 3D world. You can see that it's around 12 or 10 cents of a dollar. So it's really convenient to evaluate the number of tokens and the cost associated to that in real time. If you like to go even further, you have another option to be able to open that into App Insight, which is, you can set up App Insight to your agent. It's just a property to set up. And then you will be able to dig even more into what's going on. So I will be able to see, the various agents. So I've got, for instance, 3 agents in the last 24 hours, but I can switch to the last 2 days and see, that this one was used a lot, for instance. And what's really interesting in my case, in my scenario, was to review the tool calls. So you see that you have many tools. You have one agent that was a sample, the famous one to get the weather. But let's imagine I would like to optimize my agent. So I'm going to sort by average duration. You see that this one is the most is the one taking most of the time, and of course it's to render the scene. So this is something I'm not in control, maybe it's difficult to optimize rather than changing the resolution. But you see also that other tools could be interesting to review, to see how maybe to optimize it and to understand where you're losing time in your agent to create the best experience for the user. You can see errors, of course, the various models you may use. In Foundry, you have access to the GPT model from OpenAI, but also the model from Anthropic and many other models you can plug to your agent. Now let's switch to the experience in VS Code. So in VS Code, I can still do everything I've shown to you using the Foundry toolkit. So the Foundry toolkit, you see that I was logged in there. I can see my various agents, so I decided to pick that one. I can review some information about my agent. I decided to use 2 CPU, to use 4 GB of memory. I can see, the version. So this one was just deployed. This one was the previous one that I tried many times. I still have the playground working. So if I'm going to show you, let's do a simple stuff like create 3 cubes of different colors and show me the rendering. What it's going to do is to remotely call my agent, the very same agent we've seen so far, and you see that now I can review in live the logs, which has been super useful once again to be able to see, on the fly that maybe I've got a permission denied issue. In my case, I'm generating Blender code on the fly. So I was really interesting to see the log and see, if the Blender code was not generated properly. So I've been able to fine-tune my prompt to ask to the agent, do not use this specific API of Blender, because I would like to guide it. So it was something very useful to check the agents. You could do also evaluation on the platform to have similar stuff to be able to evaluate, what's going on with your agent. So you see, I was able to have the very same experience and I could continue the experience from there. I have also access to the file that we've seen just before, so in TMP, I can see the very same rendering that we see there. And you can see the current state, like this session is active, of course. So it's interesting to see in which state each session is, because the platform is managing also, the state of the session. So see, if we're going back in the portal, for instance, and I'm going in the session, you see that for now I've got 2 active session and idle one. After a couple of minutes, like 30 minutes maybe, the session will go into idle mode to not cost money to you, which means that when it will go back to the active mode, it will map the session to this MicroVM instance, which is very convenient. And then potentially, in my case, I had to take care of that because I would like to restore the Blender process and reload the latest 3D scene that I was working on. For that, I just need to benefit from the files to be able to load the Blender scene that was saved there and restore it. So sometimes you have a bit of work to do, but most of the time the platform will cover everything automatically for you. So I've been using this VS Code extension that my team is working on. I'm working on this extension myself. What I did in my case, I decided to create an agent from scratch. You have 2 options. Either you use a sample, this is what I'm going to show you, or you can generate using Copilot or on any coding agent, because we are providing skills for that. So this skill is going to be fed up by sample and specific instruction. And I'm going to use a sample in my case, a good old deterministic way. And what I decided to do is to use Python. You could use Copilot SDK, agent framework, or your own favorite framework like LangChain, LangGraph, or whatever, or even no framework at all. And I decided to use a response API, which is the one you will use most of the time. Invocation API is for edge cases. Then I decided to pick the tool, which is local tool. That's why you've seen the weather one. It's the one that I started from. And then I've been iterating on it using coding agent. If you scaffold that on your machine, then you just have to press F5 and it will run locally on your machine. In my case, as this is a bit more complex, I'm going to show you the code. The code is basically, an agent having multiple local tools, like tools to execute Blender code, to be able to search for assets, which is not something I did in these demos, and to download as GLB. We've seen that together. And I'm using agent framework and SDK to wrap everything to be ready for the platform. So the only line of code that is required to make it ready for the hosted agent platform is this wrapper that's going to wrap my agent and expose it in a specific way that you have all the experience I've shown you so far. Okay, and then I've been creating a little middleware in between to be able to stream specific waiting message to improve the user experience. But if you look to the way to start my agent, I've got additional things. Usually you will have kind of main.py will be the starting point. In my case, this is a more complex script to start because I need to start Blender, of course, to check that Blender is still working well. For that, I've got a socket connection on top of it. So I've got a bit more complexity on top of that, which proves that you can go very far using the hosted agent platform. And then my Docker file, is going to explain to load this specific script at the end. And what I'm doing, the first time the image is going to be built, is to download Blender, which could take time, of course. But then Blender is available in every MicroVM, and the cold start is pretty fast when I'm switching from idle to active. Because of this new MicroVM architecture, it's not only I've got really good isolation thanks to that, but also really nice cold start timing. So this is mainly what I did. So deploy that, and if I like to test it locally, either I can run the Python script myself, and it will use my local Blender on my Windows machine, or I can use Docker to fully simulate what I will have in production, which is better to my point of view, because if it runs properly on my Docker instance, normally it should work as is. This is the concept of Docker. So yes, I need to start Docker first, which I forgot. And once it will be launch, I can then run this command. That should work well now. And I will be able then to run Docker on my local machine. I'm going to show you the latest tool I wanted to show you to conclude this long demonstration, is to use the agent inspector of Foundry toolkit. If I'm clicking on it, you see now I'm connected to my agent, and this time I'm using the LLM from Foundry, but I'm using my local resources, which I'm running the Python code on my developer machine. I'm running Blender into Docker on my developer machine, and I can ask like create 4 spheres this time of different colors, and I'm not going to ask for the rendering to have a faster output. So it's going to work, and in the very same way, it's going to generate Blender code and do a rendering, a very simple rendering, because it's going to do a screenshot of the viewport. But this is the way I was working, debugging it locally, checking the code generated, having a first level of of analysis of the logs, and then I was able, in a very smooth way, to deploy that to the Foundry platform using this button. This button is going to automatically package everything that it needs to deploy that to the hosted agent platform. And you see that then you can switch from the local playground in a way to the hosted version to be able to see that if everything is working as you were expecting. So it's still executing the Blender code. So let's wait for it. And what you can see is this very same agent is also available in Teams. What I decided to do is to create a fun logo to make it more professional. And you can then also ask to create starter prompts. So if I'm clicking on this one, for instance, you see that it will help people to understand what I'm working on. So it will trigger the agent in the same way we've seen before. So we have to wait for it. But it's the very same experience we've seen there using M365 Copilot. So this is everything I wanted to show you. You can download the source code on my GitHub. I think it's a very interesting scenario because it shows the power of building agent with your custom code. You can see that you can go way further than using prompt agent or declarative agent, while still being able to expose your agent to M365 Copilot. You have additional services. Of course, it's a really important platform with a lot of features. You can use WorkIQ, for instance. I would maybe being able to define using a SharePoint document the way to build words for kids, for instance, working with a UX designer or maybe a storyteller that would say like, okay, when you're building words, I would like the words to look like that using a Word document or whatever. And I could feed the agent from WorkIQ. There are so many things you can do with this scenario. So feel free to watch the build session, dedicated on this platform and play with it and provide your feedback. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.